The midterms may be over, but voters in Mississippi are gearing up for a Senate runoff election on Tuesday. Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, who took the seat after the retirement of Thad Cochran, is up against former Congressman and Democrat Mike Espy. Hyde-Smith has been under fire since video surfaced on November 11th of her speaking to a rancher. And in the video, she says, "If he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be in the front row." Let's take a listen.
If he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be on the front row.
Well, Hyde-Smith initially said that was an exaggerated expression of regard. She didn't apologize, though, until Tuesday night when she addressed it during a debate.
Anyone that was offended by my comments, I certainly apologize. There was no ill will, no intent whatsoever in my statements. In nearly 20 years of service, of being your state senator, your commissioner of agriculture, and your U.S. senator, I have worked with all Mississippians. It didn't matter their skin color type, their age, or their income. That's my record. I also recognize that this comment was twisted and it was turned into a weapon to be used against me, a political weapon used for nothing but personal and political gain by my opponent. That's the type of politics Mississippians are sick and tired of.
And Espy hasn't been without controversy of his own. Hyde-Smith has been criticizing his work as a lobbyist by pointing to the hundreds of thousands of dollars that he received from a former Ivory Coast dictator. Joining me now, CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. So, Ed, this is really the first time that we've seen Hyde-Smith apologize for her comments. Before Tuesday, it seemed like she was really resistant to apologizing. What changed?
Well, I think she understood this was a good chance to address a large number of Mississippi voters and also those of us watching outside the state to see whether she would either double down or apologize. And in essence, she did both. She apologized to anyone who was offended, but also suggested that her words were being twisted by her Democratic opponent, Mike Espy. So in essence, sort of saying, sorry, but, also look at the fact that our competition is trying to make hay of this. And they certainly are, because it has drawn attention to a race that was otherwise pretty sleepy and has raised questions about whether or not she'll be able to hold on.
The Espy campaign just released 2 attack ads. I want to play one of them for you.
We've worked hard to put the stereotypes that hurt our state behind us. So here comes Cindy Hyde-Smith, caught saying she would sit in the front row at a public hanging. She said it was a joke. Caught saying voter suppression was a good thing. She said it was another joke. We can't afford a senator who embarrasses us and reinforces the stereotypes we've worked so hard to overcome. We're better than this, Mississippi, and that's no joke.
I'm Mike Espy, and I approve this message.
Do you have a sense if taking Hyde-Smith's comments on directly is really the right move for Espy at this point?
Well, part of this appears to be designed to mimic what went on in neighboring Alabama last year when the Democrat Doug Jones was able to prevail over Roy Moore. Remember that in the closing weeks of that campaign, where Moore was facing accusations of sexual misconduct involving some young women, there was an argument made by Doug Jones and his supporters and others in the business community in Alabama that the state needed to move beyond this kind of behavior and these kinds of people and needed to focus on somebody who could perhaps represent the state better, especially the business interests. It seems, in this case, Espy may be trying something similar by so explicitly taking this on. Frankly, also, he's trailing, so he has to find a way to somehow get ahead. If he's able to turn out as many black voters as he can in a state that's 37% African American, plus win over enough non-black progressive or independent voters, he could narrowly win this thing in a state that hasn't elected a Democrat to the U.S. Senate since 1982. Yeah. So it could be a risky strategy, especially going into a holiday weekend where people may be out of state or certainly not paying attention to politics. But it seems at this point they have no choice, really, but to at least try.
You mentioned how a Democrat hasn't won a Senate seat there since 1982. What are Espy's chances, really, at this point?
Well, we'll see. I mean, there was a runoff, a 3-way race that played out, and on election night, neither of the candidates got at least 50%. So state law requires a runoff that's happening next Tuesday. It'll be Espy versus Hyde-Smith, so somebody will prevail. The third candidate on election day was Chris McDaniel, a far more conservative Republican who drew about 16% of the vote, so drawing votes away from Hyde-Smith. Republicans I've talked to down in Mississippi say they still anticipate that at least some of his supporters will show up and support her. They won't necessarily sit on their hands, especially because President Trump is coming to the state on Monday. He's scheduled to do at least 2 public rallies, and as we've seen in other states this year, he has a tendency to show up and help lift the Republican on the ticket ever so slightly, perhaps just enough to win.
You know, I want to ask you about that because President Trump has really backed Hyde-Smith and had this to say on Tuesday when talking about her.
So Cindy Hyde-Smith is a spectacular woman. She's a great senator. She came in. She's done a fantastic job in a short period of time. She made a statement which I know that she feels very badly about it, and it was just sort of said in jest, as she said, and she's a tremendous woman, and it's a shame that she has to go through this. I think she's going to do very well. I really believe she's going to do very well. I've gotten to know her well. She's a person that loves the people of Mississippi. She loves the people of this country.
You know, it's interesting, Ed, because she was actually a Democrat, and the White House was a little concerned about this. She was a Democrat until 2010. Why is the president embracing her now, and how do you think his endorsement could play out in this race?
Sure. She was a Democrat until 2010 when she ran for state agriculture commissioner and then was appointed to this position in the past year.
By the governor,
right? By the governor, Phil Bryant, in part because Republican leaders here in Washington wanted to see another woman in the Senate Republican Conference. And she was really one of the only options in Mississippi because she replaced Thad Cochran, of course, who had to retire for health reasons. The president supports her, quite frankly, because she's been a loyal Republican vote, and he needs as many of those as he can get in the Senate, where the larger the Republican margin, the easier it will be to not only confirm the president's judicial appointments, but also a series of potentially new cabinet nominees next year, should he decide to part ways with others beyond just his attorney general. So the larger the Republican margin, the easier it should be for the president, and the easier it will be for Republicans to hold off potentially popular legislation that's passed over in the Democratic House. So given that she's been a loyal foot soldier for the GOP so far, at least, the president's willing to spend some political capital on her in the closing days of this runoff.
Ed O'Keefe in Washington. Ed, thanks so much for joining us.
Take care.